Uhagani, Nia Nada Binya. Hi, I'm Gina Jackson. I am co-founder and CEO of the Return to the Heart Foundation, a foundation that was created by Native women for Native women and girls. I'm coming today from the lands of the Pyramid Lake Paiute people, which is in the beautiful northern Nevada area. Return to the Heart empowers and resources Indigenous women as an intermediary. Our goal is to support the women who are bringing holistic healing to their communities and beyond. And through this work, cultivating a world where Indigenous women and girls are valued, protected, and supported, and where Mother Earth can thrive for future generations. Our focus areas are climate justice, narrative change, economic and restorative development, and civic engagement. We are here to fight for equality, for racial justice, and gender justice. As Native women, some of these injustices are horrific and absolutely unacceptable. That so many Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit relatives are missing, have been trafficked, or murdered. This has become a silent crisis and is the reason today that we are here for this funder briefing. We cannot wait even one more minute to talk about this and to bring folks together so we can make collective action and take steps in the right direction to protect Native people. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Zoya Awan. Zoya is the Director of Public Affairs at Walmart. And in her role, she directs strategic outreach and engagement strategy for Walmart's strategic partnerships within multicultural and minority communities. She works with people with disabilities, Native Americans, emerging generations across communities. She is passionate about giving a voice to those not always heard and building partnerships to work across sectors to make an impact in communities. She is our ally, our supporter, and beautiful soul.
I really feel very Assalamu alaikum. Mera naam Zoya hai. Peace be upon you all. My name is Zoya. I feel humbled to be here in front of you all, to representing Walmart Corporation as a Director of Public Affairs. And I sit in a unique role where I really get to build authentic relationships, or I try to build trust and authentic relationships with community so that we can know that we're learning and growing and work on this journey together to be better and help people. And in my role, as Gina mentioned, I work with people with disabilities. I work with Indigenous populations, and then overarchingly, like all diverse, but everyone, emerging generations. And, you know, there really is a powerful theme, I feel, in the air on how we're coming together to say, like, okay, there's a lot that we don't know about, or maybe there's things happening under our nose that we should all continue to care about and invest, that we can show that community is powerful.
When we launched Return to the Heart in 2020, it was the same week that the global pandemic was announced. We had to quickly turn and pivot all of our efforts towards raising money for PPE. As you may remember, the first appropriations from the feds did not include tribes. The second round of appropriations did, but getting the funding out was extremely delayed. All the while, people in our families, in our communities, especially the elders, were dying. We saw so many women, Native women, rising up in their communities, doing support for not just taking care of their own families and their neighbors, but support for their communities and in their tribes, all the while stepping out and being a voice for getting out the vote and really trying to make a difference in our communities. When we first started our fund, the Traditional Helpers and Healers, it was micro-granting to Native women-led projects and organizations who are doing healing work in our communities. Healing from COVID, healing from colonization, healing from the myriad of issues that have been forced upon us as Native people who were displaced and now are regrouping and working on ways that we can support our communities to thrive. As we were doing this microgranting work in the last round, one of the things that we saw were more missing and murdered Indigenous women projects than ever before. And as we learned about these projects, we learned about the extreme underfunding of this work. And we knew we had to do something. We had to use our voice, use our power to support them and so many out there who are working to fight to disrupt this crisis. We know there's huge needs in Native communities, but folks may not really have a good understanding of this crisis. Even for myself, I know the situation for missing and murdered Indigenous women is dire, but it's also so traumatic. It's hard to hear the statistics, but it's so important that our stories get told. It's hard to wrap your mind around what to do as an individual, as a professional, as someone who works in philanthropy. So Return to the Heart jumped in to this work to educate the philanthropic sector, educate our allies who care about social justice, and to put an end to this pattern of underfunding for those who are on the front and in the center to stop the violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. Now, in sharing the landscape and the statistics, the National Criminal Justice Training Center shared statistics in 2022 that 40% of sex trafficking victims are Native women. 40%. 84.3% of Native women, which is more than 4 out of 5 women, have experienced violence. Murder is the third leading cause of death for Indigenous women, which is 10 times higher than other ethnicities. In preparing for this briefing, a memory came up that I had not thought about for many, many years. I felt adrenaline surging through my body as I ran barefoot through a field, being chased by a person with a gun. As I ran through this field, I didn't slow, even though my feet were being cut by broken glass that was in the field. I did not fall, although I felt like I could at any second. I did not look back. I made it to my grandparents' house and I was safe. I was 19 years old and pregnant, living on a reservation in northern Nevada. I was one of the lucky ones. So many are not. So many murders remain unsolved. Even here in my local community, even since COVID, just in the last few years, there have been horrific murders, and some have remained unsolved. Families are left with no justice, and Native women and girls are still here, yet now more vulnerable, as those people are still out there. So when Native people are seen through a mainstream lens, a colonized lens, a lot of times the root causes are not necessarily discussed. Like why? Why Native women? Why Native people? Well, the statistics didn't just happen by happenstance or by some deficit that Native people inherently have that makes us more vulnerable. We have been targeted for our land, for the land's resources, our waters, and for our bodies for ourselves. When the Violence Against Women Act was first being passed, one of the senators testified that hunters know where to hunt, and fishermen know where to fish, and predators know where to get their prey. Well, they're coming to tribal communities, and that is one of the reasons that our numbers are so high for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. Now, I mentioned jurisdictional issues. There was a law that was passed in 78 that took away authority from tribal courts to be able to prosecute non-native people for higher crimes. So misdemeanors, fine, but for higher crimes, we end up with the tribal police usually on site. Sometimes they might call in state police to help with investigation or backup. Then we have the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and then we have the Attorney General's office, the feds. And so when you have all these layers, it's easy for things to get lost or slip through the cracks. And when it comes to, so even if things are not falling through the cracks as far as, the investigations go, when it comes down to prosecution, years ago, the federal prosecution rate for crimes that happen on the reservation, so prosecution of non-natives on tribal lands, was like 51%. So when that happens, basically people are getting away with not just crimes, but sometimes even murder. And these issues are deeply ingrained into colonization and displacement of Native people. There's this lack of trust and ability to see Native people and tribes as competent to hold perpetrators accountable in court. And so, these are things that, we have to deal with, but there's another layer to Native women and girls not being valued is when someone goes missing, the media attention is not there. It's not the same as the media attention that others get. This is not okay, and this needs to change. I'm going to share a brief glimpse into the funding that's out there right now, the landscape of missing and murdered Indigenous women, the funds, philanthropic funding. We are working with Candid for baseline funding data. We want to know where we are today so we can see, what kind of impact that we can make. As the funding we know it's underfunded. We know that there's very little out there, but how much is out there? Who is funding this particular area? We want to know that we are able to move the dial towards the arc of justice. In a quick initial review that Candid did, there were 32 funders that were found that specifically reference missing and murdered Indigenous women. We have another call to talk about the taxonomy, because not necessarily everyone will report in those particular terms. There may be other terminology that we may be able to find other funders that actually are funding, but we just weren't picked up in the first round. But we do know that there's at least 32, but that's 32 out of over 130,000 funders here in the US. This statistic is not okay either. And one thing that's pretty interesting, which I'm really pleased about, is 17 of the funders who registered for this briefing stated that they do fund missing and murdered Indigenous women. So happy that folks are who are funding or on the call. That's amazing. And, we hope that this number that is so low, it will grow immensely. Again, back to social justice, equality, gender justice. Let's move that dial. Now, a situation that needs to be lifted up that is very traumatic. Sometimes it's hard. It is so hard. I personally do not like to run towards trauma. It's very difficult. But at the same time, we have to learn more. We have to dig deep into the root causes. We have to face the realities that have gotten us into this situation. And we need to learn more and come together to take action before things do get worse. The top 10 states with the highest rates of missing and murdered women are New Mexico, Washington, Arizona, Alaska, Montana, California, Nebraska, Utah, Minnesota, and Oklahoma. A really important report that was created by the Urban Indian Health Institute, with very little to no funding, by the way, was absolutely groundbreaking in sharing initial data of missing and murdered Indigenous women. That report is still so valuable and gets referenced all the time. And that was in 2018. Now, the feds just released their own report, which was released in November of this past year. Very important report based on listening tour and hearing from folks on the ground. Fabulous report, love it. I would highly recommend that you read both. I do have a resource and report reference sheet that I am sharing after the webinar and in the email. So you'll be able to go and look through those reports. The federal report, by the way, is over 200 pages. Really, really good, solid recommendation, in depth. But some of these recommendations really are for increased resources and funding. And when you depend on, congressional funding or appropriations, that's difficult. There's a lot of great reports out there, right? The feds have released, I've been a part of some of these reports, really good stuff, but are they funded? That's the question. Many times they're not. So in philanthropy, we don't have to wait. We don't have to wait for Congress. We don't have to wait for anything. We can act now. And for the folks who, will eventually, hopefully get funding, that necessarily aren't the same folks that we may be funding. We are looking to fund grassroots, on the ground, front and center, organizations and folks who are working on these issues today. They may not be in a bigger organization that has the infrastructure and that has all of the staffing that they need to be able to go after federal funding. I know firsthand, I've been at the Interior and even at the White House under the Office of Management and Budget. There's a lot of red tape. It takes a lot to navigate the federal system, and it is not necessarily possible for a lot of these organizations that we will support with our Sisters Are Sacred Fund. So I'm excited that, we can use our power and be nimble and do good and disrupt this crisis, and we can do it now. So I ask that you join us and participate in this fund and do your part to make a difference for gender justice, racial justice, and really, help stop the violence against Native women, girls, and Two-Spirit people.
That was a lot to digest, which is thank you for sharing all of this. But the good thing is that afterwards, she's also going to be sending this report out, and it's not like we're not expected to remember all of the stats, but thanks for just explaining to us some of the depth and gravity, and also being vulnerable enough to share your personal story, as a Native women, the Native women here. Thank you for representing so many who have not been able to speak and have their voice told. And, this isn't a comfortable topic to talk about. So thank you for that. And, I want to pass it to you, Sean, and we didn't get a chance to really do full introduction. So I would love for you, Sean, to tell us a little bit about just who you are, and because you have a very interesting role here as well, I'm gonna let you tell us who you are. And so yeah, and please explain your connection to this community and this particular issue, and what message you might have for the funders and people that are on the call today.
Okay, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Sean Scoffrey, the CEO of the Roy and Patricia Disney Family Foundation. So Native American grant making for us is a relatively new thing. It was something that we sort of leaned into during the pandemic, first in just supporting with a crisis response fund, sort of COVID response in Indian country. And then sort of more increasingly looking at sort of being on Zoom calls and where rooms of people in philanthropy were doing land acknowledgements, but weren't necessarily really moving any money to Indian country. So at one point, I stopped doing a land acknowledgement until I could move at least $1 million. Yes, Zara? You're on mute.
Oh, just in case everybody doesn't know, can you tell us what a land acknowledgement is?
I am certain that everyone in this call knows what a land acknowledgement is, but it is acknowledging the ceded territories that you're on. And it became very popular in philanthropy to start meetings off with these land acknowledgements, with rooms filled with people controlling millions of dollars in resources that weren't actually moving resources to Indian communities or Native communities. Um, so I made it a point for our foundation to do something different, right? I approached my board and asked to launch a formal program for us. And within our first year, we moved $1 million. First, $500,000 PRI to Arista, CDFI, working with a native-led CDFI. Another $500,000 PRI to Hawaii Community Lending, working with Native Hawaiians. And then grants to Return to the Heart, First Nations Development Institute, Native Voices Rising, Native American Philanthropy, all general operating support, with nothing sort of prescribed from our end, right? Just it didn't have to conform to what we were doing in our traditional grant making, affordable housing, criminal justice, or environmental justice. We want to move money quickly, and let the organizations determine how the resources would be used. So all general operating. And that was about 2.5 years ago. And as we then started getting into Indian country, and one, it's large, right? There's lots of tribal nations, and we were getting requests from a multitude of tribal communities for a multitude of issues to support, and it was definitely a little bit overwhelming. Originally we thought we could have some sort of impact, and we figured that let's look at a population that is severely underfunded. So first we started on gender, right, and wanted to work with women, and then just again peeling back a layer, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited people. We know that there's not a lot of funding that ever gets dedicated to that sort of particular population. So this past year, or actually a couple of months ago, we made a $500,000 commitment to Return to the Heart to see the creation of a pooled grant-making fund that would be participatory in nature. So again, trying to sort of decolonize philanthropy and bring in more community voice into a grant-making process. The fund is designed to have some community leaders be the reviewers and to select organizations. We put the first $500,000 in, and I'm hoping that folks on this call would contribute as well. And I'm doing everything I can to make phone calls, sending out carrier pigeons, any way to reach people to say, hey, this is a very important issue. It's a neglected issue. It's one that is often overlooked, and it's important that those of us who are stewards of resources take the chance in moving resources to Return to the Heart, to this fund, our Sisters Are Sacred Fund, and trust that the leaders and community folks in this space will be able to identify grassroots organizations and women-led grassroots organizations that are at the heart of this issue and that are just trying to sort of wave a flag, have amplify a voice, and do something to change the statistics that Gina read. So that's where I am. And again, I encourage every single person on this call to hopefully contribute.
I really appreciate the idea of a co-creation in the participatory fund. You know, it creates more incentive, and also to me feels like is about what this is like in the indigenous systems, and the right relationship and how we indigenize it is when we're doing it together in a participatory way, as I've learned it through like my indigenous partners that I've gotten to know for a while. And Kate, I want to turn it to you, because speaking about this like relationship and the right relationship with indigenous communities, as I understand it, but I'm looking forward to hearing from you. You've been involved in a report that has kind of talked about this right relationship, and I just would love for you to talk about your connection to the indigenous community, this issue, and what your ask would be for those who are listening.
I'm honored to be here, and thank you so much, Zoya, for your moderation of this panel. It's wonderful to always check in with Return to the Heart Foundation and the wonderful work that they're doing. So my huge thanks. My name is Kate Finn. I am a member of the Osage Nation. The Osage Nation has roots in the Missouri River Valley and then was set in Oklahoma. I myself sit outside of Los Angeles. I'm also the director of First Peoples Worldwide, and our work is to work from a foundation of Indigenous values to build a sustainable future for all. And one of the parts of my work that I love to do is research. And I come to this desk as director of this, having a background as an attorney in Indian country, and doing most of my work actually on the social and economic impacts of development. And my work involved a major focus on trafficking as it relates to development, oil and gas development, and to other forms. So in a lot of ways, this work is near and dear to my heart, and something that is good to step in. And yes, so what I will be presenting very formally here is some research that I was able to do to ask Native entrepreneurs in particular, hey, so what is catalytic to you? Like, what actually makes your business grow? What actually is funding that looks good to you? What is going to make your enterprise vision thrive? And so I get to present some of that research, and I'll just, kind of jump to the end point here. One of our major findings was funding of intermediaries like Return to the Heart Foundation, because there is so much here that embodies relationship, reciprocity, and Indigenous values. We know that our women and girls are cared for when they are working with Return to the Heart Foundation, and that is ultimately what we want from the money, is the care and the knowledge that we are creating a better future. So before I get into the data, let me say too that one thing that brings me here to this issue as well is there is not a tribal nation here on this continent that doesn't have some intersection with missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. The structural racism caused by colonization has hit every single nation, and every single nation has a story. At Osage, it's the Osage murders. And it is the legacy of the murders of so many of our grandmothers and great-grandmothers in the 30s and 40s, which is a part of my own story as I come here. And let me say this, that this is generational. This is a generational problem. The United States government has long removed itself from investigations and jurisdiction around criminal crimes in Indian country, and it will take them a while to get back to that in their goal to do so. And this issue, the trauma that is caused by crime, the trauma that is caused by criminal violence, by having perpetrators in communities by having women and girls that are removed from their communities, removed from their culture. That is generational. And so what we are looking for and what we need right now is a generational solution. We need solutions right now that are going to start building that power, because women and girls have so much power. Our relatives are so powerful and they have the solutions. And what we are looking for, and what I love about the work that this fund and Return to the Heart Foundation is doing, is starting right now to build generational pathways that can bring us back to health and showcase power and provide communities with their language, with their culture, with economic opportunities, educational opportunities, all of those things that have been removed. So that to me is a huge part of what we're doing here. And let me pause very quickly to share my screen. So as I said, we were able at First Peoples Worldwide to, let me make sure I got this. Yes, I think you can see my screen. We were able to do research on what are catalytic investments, and particularly with philanthropy. What we wanted to know from Native entrepreneurs is, what is catalytic? What do you need? What works for you? Not just what works for the private sector, but what works for you. And what we found through our research was that there are several characteristics of really positive, successful investments. So we looked at the investments that worked and we said, okay, what worked? One is that these investments operate at the pace of relationship. They require that right relationship between the foundation, between the intermediary, the enterprise, and the capital provider. That the best catalytic investments shift power by giving power to Native leadership. Those Native leaders have the solutions at their fingertips. They have the relationships. We have to use that capital to shift power. The best investments enabled long-term success through flexibility and renegotiation. There's a lot of relationships that if you want to be in it for the long term, they require good communication. Flexibility and renegotiation isn't failure. It just means that it's time to iterate. It's time to think through what the needs are now. So the successful investments that we found did that. And then we said that in Indian country in particular, what was needed from philanthropy was catalytic capital plus. And what I meant by that was providing consistency. One of the big issues with enterprises in Indian country was chasing grants and having to go back to chasing grants and not being able to find an investment. And there was a cliff there. And oftentimes Native entrepreneurs had to figure out what to do. And in the process of figuring out how to create consistent capital, had to change their mission or had to change their business plan or had to accept terms that they didn't really like or give up on a piece of their work. But what we're saying is, if philanthropy can step in with integrated capital and integrated capital thesis, we can create consistency. And when you have consistency and you're allowing Native leadership to consistently lead, then you get the results that you're after in terms of impact. And so that was a huge part of what we found was the ability for philanthropy to provide grants and investments in one tranche at one place so that there would be consistency for the Native entrepreneur. We had 5 key recommendations from our report. The first was to enact data justice. And what we mean by that is transparency. For philanthropy to show what they're doing, much as Sean, you are doing, to show what you're doing, because it allows other folks to see how things can be done. It can be done. But when we did this report, it was really hard to find terms on deals. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is it allows Native folks to know what's going on, what cards they have, what can they ask for, what are the cards on the table, and how can, if I'm a Native leader in a particular community, some of those are going to be useful and some aren't, but I have to know what exists. The second thing that we found is to center Indigenous-led intermediaries. Intermediaries is folks who have the data, they have the relationships, they know what's going on, and they can be flexible. And so centering that power is shifting power towards the issues that you care about. The third one we found is to increase investor literacy in Native Nations 101. There's just a lot of folks that don't know a lot about Native nations, but there's a lot of resources out there to learn. So invest in the relationship by learning and asking good questions and coming in a curious way. One of the things that we found, one of the first things we heard and the last things we heard all throughout this research was that entrepreneurs spend so much time educating. They spend so much time educating the investor that they don't actually get to talk about their business plan or their impact or what it is. So come ready to learn, but come having prepared is a big part of what we found. Promoting integrated capital strategies. So again, Sean, as you said, this is everything from grants to loan guarantees to PRIs, recoverable grants. What are the strategies that you can move as an investor in philanthropy? Like, what can you do, and finding out what you can do in order to be creative? Because if we can all be creative around a capital stack, that provides consistency, that provides runway that's necessary to solve for these generational issues in Indian country. And then investing in right relationship. Right relationship takes time. It takes communication, it takes intentionality, and it takes clarity of roles. You know, understanding as an investor, okay, these are the things I can do right now, and these are the things I just can't. My investment committee is just not there yet on these things, but here's something I can do, or here's something I can commit to. That's important, and that is a huge part of creating a good relationship. And so as much as we talk about building time, building relationship, it's also really important to entrepreneurs. What we found through this research is to get to a quick no. If an investor is unable to invest at this time, that's important to know. If what they can do at this time is crowd in some other investors or provide some technical support, that's awesome. And it's good to know. And it allows folks in the Native side to build a capital stack, to build partnerships in a way that help them to move the issue forward. So that's a very small snapshot of the research we did, but you know, it's really true that Native power is ascendant in a lot of different ways. If you look at the rise of Native languages, it's just a really fun way to show what's going on in Indian country. But you know, Native power is ascendant, and there is always a way to step in. It may not seem big, but it is big, and there's a way to really be part of the solution in a big way. So thank you all so much for the opportunity to present the research.
Thank you, Kate. I think that some of the things that really resonated for me around, you know, this invest in the right relationship. And I often say to myself and my partners as well, it's like we move at the speed of trust, right? So this isn't something that we want to say, like, we want to be we want to be one of the most trusted retailers. So we move at that speed. And a lot of times that also requires just being authentic about where we are at, right? And I think right now, where I could say that I feel like this particular issue is just not something a lot of people know about, right? In a way that actually they connect to in an empathetic, personal kind of way. So, you know, that is part of our intention for this call. And I want to, you know, as we get closer to wrapping this up, I'll pass it to you, Gina, back to talk a little bit more particularly about the fund and how people can participate. But then also, I want to ask you to kind of end with what the dream is, right? Like, what is the dream to actually do with that fund? You know, we're not just asking for money. What are we going to do with it? And what's the impact going to be, hopefully, of that?
In closing, it takes deeper learning to have deeper healing. And we need allies, not just to learn, but who are willing to take a journey with us with cultural humility and bring critical thinking, analytical reasoning, complex problem solving, and teamwork, letting the Native people, the Native women, the people with lived experience guide the way. We're not coming in as a grant maker telling the field, the folks who are doing this work, what they should be doing. We're letting them tell us, and it's part of our learning journey, step up and to do more. Thank you so much for coming and for listening in. And we are excited to be able to work together and really make a difference for Native women, girls, and Two-Spirit people.